Okay, so Kundalini, right? I gotta say, it's one of those things that's always kind of fascinated me. But to be honest, sometimes it feels like trying to, I don't know, trying to grab hold of smoke or something, you know?
I get that.
Like everyone in the yoga world seems to talk about it like it's this big mystery, this hidden energy. Well, what is it really? Luckily, you sent in this Wikipedia article on Kundalini. So I guess today's deep dive is all about trying to pin it down a little better, getting clear on what this whole Kundalini concept actually is, where it comes from, and maybe even what it could mean, you know, for you, for me, for everyone listening.
Well, what I find fascinating right off the bat is how deeply rooted this concept is in ancient Hindu tradition. The article makes it clear. We're not talking about some new age fad here. Kundalini is seen as this divine feminine energy, often called Shakti. And we can trace this idea way, way back, like all the way back to the Upanishads and Tantric texts.
Wow. Yeah, those are some seriously old texts. But, you know, when I think about Kundalini, what always gets me is the imagery.
Right.
That whole coiled serpent at the base of the spine thing. What's that all about?
The powerful image, isn't it? And it's meant to be. This serpent symbolizes a huge force within us, but one that's often described as, well, dormant, sleeping, coiled up, waiting to be awakened, you could say. And when we talk about Kundalini rising, what we're talking about is this energy moving through these centers in the body. They're called chakras.
Okay, right. The chakras. Now, this is where it gets super interesting to me, because I've always thought of the chakras as like these, I don't know, energetic crossroads in the body, like places where different energies meet and interact.
That's a good way to visualize it.
So as this Kundalini energy rises, like the article's describing, is it like, is it activating different parts of ourselves as it goes?
That's a great way to think about it, yeah. Each chakra is associated with specific aspects of us, of our being. The article gets into this a little bit, like, for example, the root chakra. That's down at the base of the spine. Right. That's related to, well, feelings of security, feeling grounded, that kind of thing. Yeah. So as Kundalini moves through each chakra, the belief is that it can potentially lead to greater awareness, more balance, and ultimately, you know, a profound transformation. But, and this is a big but that a lot of traditions emphasize, it's best to approach this whole process carefully, with preparation, with guidance, because the energies involved can be really powerful.
Yeah, totally. It's like you're saying it's less about, I don't know, forcing something open and more about creating the right environment, the right conditions, so that things can unfold naturally.
Exactly. And it's worth noting, while the article mostly focuses on Kundalini from the Hindu tradition's point of view, it's really interesting to see how this ancient idea has sparked interest in Western thought, too.
Oh, totally. You're talking about people like Carl Jung, right?
Exactly.
That's a pretty big name in psychology, to be exploring something like Kundalini.
Right. And he saw some really interesting parallels between Kundalini and the workings of what he called the unconscious mind. He actually felt that. The symbolism, the experiences people described with Kundalini offered this powerful new way to understand the deeper layers of the human psyche, you know?
Wow, that's fascinating. So we're seeing connections to psychology here, which honestly makes me wonder, are there downsides? Risks? What do we need to watch out for with this kind of energy work?
It is a good question, and one worth thinking about, for sure. Jung's insights are super interesting. But, you know, it's like anything else, right? Working with powerful forces, even symbolically, like he was doing, well, there's always the potential for, I don't know, mishaps, unexpected effects. And the article does mention there have been cases of people experiencing some, I guess you could say psychological difficulties, things that seem to be associated with this whole Kundalini awakening thing.
Right, okay. Yeah, see, that's the side of it that always makes me hesitate a little, because it's like, this isn't just about, you know, feeling a little more relaxed after yoga class. We're talking about some potentially intense experiences here, right? So, for someone listening who's thinking, okay, this is interesting, maybe you want to explore this, but they want to do it safely, responsibly, what are their options? Do you have to, like, book a one-way ticket to India and find a guru on a mountaintop somewhere?
Well, it doesn't have to be quite that extreme. I mean, the article talks about two main approaches to this, to Kundalini awakening. There's the active approach and the passive approach. The active route, it involves, you know, dedicated practices, things like yoga, meditation, breath work, Stuff you might already be familiar with, actually, but in this case, they're done with a very specific intention. Like you're focusing them on awakening this Kundalini energy. And often, this is done with a teacher, with a guide.
Okay, so it's like taking those familiar tools, those practices, but you're really focusing them like a laser on this one specific energy.
Exactly. And then there's the passive approach, which is more about, well, surrender, I guess you could say, removing any blocks, any obstacles. That might be preventing Kundalini from flowing naturally. The article mentioned something called Shaktipat, which is often a part of this path.
Shaktipat, okay, yeah, what is that? Exactly. I've heard the term, but it's always sounded a little, I don't know, a little like magic to me.
Yeah, it kind of does, right? You could think of it as like, an energetic jumpstart, maybe. Basically, it involves the transmission of spiritual energy from like a realized master, a teacher, to a student. And the idea is this transmission can help to awaken the student's own Kundalini or give them a taste of it, a kind of reference point for their own practice.
Wow, that's really interesting. It's like the idea of mentorship, but on this whole other energetic level. But I'm guessing there's not just one interpretation of how this all works, right? How Kundalini works, how it's experienced.
You're absolutely right. Even within the traditions that place a lot of importance on Kundalini, there are variations in how it's understood. The Wikipedia article talks about Krishnamacharya. He's often called the father of modern yoga. And he actually had a different perspective. He didn't necessarily see Kundalini as something to be raised, like, that upward movement we often hear about. He saw it more as a blockage, like something that was preventing energy from flowing freely.
Oh, wow. So instead of this upward movement, he saw it as something that needed to be like
with glory,
cleared out, released, so that energy could flow naturally. That's a fascinatingly different way of looking at it.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it just goes to show there's no one right way to approach this whole realm of exploration.
Right. It's more about finding what makes sense to you, what feels right, in your own experience.
Exactly. And maybe that's a good place to pause for a second and ask you listening, what are you thinking about right now? Does any of this resonate with you? What questions are coming up for you?
I've got to say, one of the things I find so fascinating about all this is this idea that this concept of Kundalini, which it comes from, ancient wisdom, ancient traditions, might actually have some really interesting connections to modern science. It's like we're starting to bridge that gap between those two worlds.
Absolutely. And the article kind of hints at that. It focuses mostly on the traditional understanding, but it also raises some really tantalizing questions. Like, imagine, what if modern science could actually measure Kundalini, like visualize this energy in the body using scientific instruments?
Whoa. See, now that would be incredible. Talk about a paradigm shift. What kind of doors could that open? It's like taking something that's been shrouded in mystery for centuries and bringing it into the lab. Imagine being able to actually see this energy flowing through the chakras, to measure its effects on the body and mind.
And the really wild thing is, we're starting to see hints of that happening. Researchers are getting really interested in these subtle energies, using biofeedback, brain imaging, all sorts of cutting-edge tools.
So it's like the ancient traditions are giving us these maps, these metaphors, and now modern science might be able to give us this whole other level of understanding. Who knows what we might find?
Right.
It's like maybe Kundalini is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the hidden potentials within us.
It really makes you wonder, what else are we capable of? If we could really tap into these deeper levels of energy, of consciousness, it's a question that's been around forever. And it feels like we're just starting to scratch the surface.
Totally. It's like we're standing at the edge of this whole new frontier of understanding ourselves, understanding the universe, and who knows what we'll find there.
Exactly. This exploration of consciousness within us, in the universe. It's a journey. And what's cool is we've been using this Wikipedia article as our guide, but it's really just one starting point.
I love that analogy. It's like we've been given this, this ancient treasure map, right? And we're just starting to use these modern tools, this technology, to see if we can actually find the buried treasure.
Exactly. And it really highlights how, this pursuit of knowledge, of understanding, it's not limited to any one tradition, any one approach. It's about being open to exploring all these different perspectives, asking new questions, and just seeing where the journey takes us,
And that's what's so cool about these deep dives, I think. We started with your question about Kundalini, dug into this Wikipedia article, and now look where we are. We've got even bigger questions now. And this, the sense of wonder about what we might uncover next.
And, maybe this deep dive will inspire someone listening to start their own exploration of Kundalini or whatever other fascinating concept is calling to them.
Yes. 100%. Keep that sense of wonder alive, right? Well, that's about all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thanks to everyone for listening in, and a huge thank you to you, as always, for sharing your insights.
My pleasure. Until next time.
Until next time, keep exploring, everyone.
All right, everybody, get ready. Because today we are taking a deep dive into space exploration.
Ooh, exciting.
And I'm not talking just like skimming the surface here. We're going deep, deep down into the nitty-gritty, all thanks to primarily the space exploration article on Wikipedia.
Yeah, it's a good one.
So to kick things off, let's rewind the clock a bit. Way back, like before rockets and spacesuits.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Back when our view of space was basically just what we could make out through those early telescopes.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it, right? Like those early astronomers, Galileo with his, what was it, like a 1-inch telescope or something?
Yeah, just tiny.
Tiny little thing. And he's changing our entire understanding of the universe.
I know. Talk about groundbreaking discoveries. Those observations of Jupiter's moons, totally revolutionary.
Right. I mean, that was huge. Proving that Earth wasn't the center of everything, that's a big deal.
It makes you wonder, right? What other facts that we just take for granted now, what's going to be completely turned upside down by future generations?
Absolutely. But that's what I love about space exploration. It's constantly evolving, always pushing those boundaries.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of shift in thinking that Galileo sparked. It really paved the way, I think, for centuries of scientists, astronomers, to just keep pushing further and further, develop new technologies, and then eventually, we go from just observing space to actually launching stuff up there.
Yeah. And those early rockets, right?
Yeah.
Like the German V2, they really set the stage for everything that came after.
Yeah. It's a strange thought, though, right? A weapon of war becoming this tool for space exploration. But the V2's technology, it really did lay the groundwork for those first steps into space.
Definitely.
And then, of course, Sputnik.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I know it doesn't seem like much now, this little metal ball orbiting Earth, but back in 1957, that thing sent shockwaves around the world.
Oh, yeah, especially here in the U.S., right? I mean, that basically kicked off the whole space race.
Oh, absolutely. It was like this giant competition, the U.S. versus the Soviet Union, each one trying to, outdo the other.
Right. Prove that they were the best top dog in terms of technology, science, all of it.
Exactly. And, it wasn't just about bragging rights. I mean, think about the pace of innovation during that time.
It was incredible.
Just incredible. And then the Soviets, they pulled off what seemed impossible at the time.
Yuri Gagarin,
1961, the first human in space. Can you imagine?
What a moment in history. What a legend.
I know. The pressure, the excitement, just blasting off into the unknown like that.
Yeah. A true pioneer. But, Gagarin, he wasn't the only success story for the Soviets. They weren't just focused on sending humans up. They were going for other planets, too.
They were really ambitious with their planetary exploration, especially when it came to Venus and Mars.
Right.
Venera 7 landing on Venus in 1970, that was a huge accomplishment. It proved we could actually reach another planet.
Even if it's not exactly a welcoming place.
Right. Venus, maybe not the best vacation spot.
Yeah. I don't think those postcards would say, wish you were here.
No, probably not. Definitely not the tropical paradise some folks imagine.
Yeah, what was it that they found? Like super high temperatures, crazy pressure.
Oh, it was rough. The Venera missions, they showed us just how extreme Venus really is. Temperatures hot enough to melt lead, and the atmosphere so incredibly dense, it would just crush anything in an instant. It was a real eye-opener.
It's true. Space, it definitely plays by its own rules, that's for sure.
That's for sure. But, those discoveries, even if they weren't what we hoped for, they were crucial. They showed us just how diverse planets can be.
Right. You start to realize how much we still don't know.
Exactly. And speaking of incredible achievements, we can't forget about the Soviets launching Salyut 1 in 1971.
The first space station.
The world's first space station. It really showed off their engineering skills, and it also marked this really important shift towards international collaboration in space. It set the stage for projects like the International Space Station we have today.
It's amazing to think about how far we've come since those early days. And of course, we can't forget about the American side of the space race. The Apollo missions, especially that iconic moment in '69 Neil Armstrong, one small step.
It captured the world's imagination.
For sure, a defining moment in history.
Yeah.
But it wasn't just about those giant leaps, right? There were other missions like Voyager 1, launched in '77, that really pushed the boundaries of exploration.
Oh, absolutely. Voyager 1 crossing into interstellar space in 2012. Imagine carrying that golden record with it, a message in a bottle to whoever might find it out there in the vastness of space. It's incredible.
A time capsule of humanity hurtling through the cosmos. That's some serious long-term thinking.
Yeah.
But, before we get too caught up in all those headline-grabbing achievements, I'm kind of curious about something.
What's that?
What about those unexpected things we've stumbled across along the way? Those discoveries that made us rethink what we thought we knew about space. Those discoveries that make you go, wait, what? Like space is full of surprises, right?
Oh, absolutely. It definitely has a way of keeping us humble.
For every giant leap for mankind, there's got to be a cosmic curveball waiting to remind us just how much we don't know.
Right. It's like, oh, you thought you had it figured out. Think again.
Exactly. So what comes to mind when you think about those kinds of discoveries, those real surprises?
Well, how about those Van Allen radiation belts?
Right.
We always imagined space as this empty void, but it turns out Earth is surrounded by these zones of like super intense radiation trapped by the Earth's magnetic field.
Yeah. Didn't Explorer 1, wasn't that one of the first things that it kind of stumbled upon back in, was it 58?
That's right. And talk about a wake-up call. It wasn't just about getting something up into orbit anymore. We had to deal with this invisible danger zone.
Right. A whole new set of challenges.
It really changed the game. Suddenly, the design of spacecraft, the placement of future space stations, it all had to take those radiation belts into account.
It's a good thing they figured that out early on.
You could say that again.
But that's not the only time space has thrown us a curveball, right? What about those early missions to other planets, like Venus, for example?
Yeah.
We must have had some pretty interesting ideas about what we'd find there.
Oh, yeah, we did. And looking back, some of them were a little optimistic, let's say.
Optimistic how?
Some people genuinely thought that beneath all those clouds, Venus might actually be this lush tropical paradise.
Seriously?
Oh, yeah. But then, reality set in.
Yeah, what did those Venera probes find? I mean, it wasn't exactly a walk in the park, right?
Not even close. Venus turned out to be this scorching, hellish inferno, way hotter than anyone had imagined. And the atmosphere, forget about it.
So not paradise then?
Not so much. But, even with those probes only lasting for a short time, some just minutes the data they sent back, it was invaluable. We learned about the intense pressure, the extreme heat, the makeup of the atmosphere. It totally changed our understanding of how planets evolve and what it really takes for a planet to be habitable.
Right. So it's not just about finding places that are like Earth 2.0.
Exactly. It broadens our understanding of what's possible, even if it's not what we expect.
Yeah, makes sense. And speaking of unexpected things, what about the moons in our solar system? Before space exploration, they were just these distant points of light.
Right, just these tiny dots in the sky.
But then we take a closer look at planets like Jupiter and Saturn, and suddenly it's like, whoa, moons everywhere.
It's like a cosmic party out there, and Jupiter takes the cake.
How many moons does it have now? Like 90-something.
Over 90, and each one with its own unique characteristics. And it's really exciting. Some of them, like Europa orbiting Jupiter and Titan around Saturn, they become prime candidates in the search for life beyond Earth.
Europa with that subsurface ocean, right? And Titan with its methane lakes. It does sound kind of sci-fi, I have to admit. What makes scientists think there could be life on those moons?
Well, with Europa, it's not just about the liquid water, though that's obviously a big deal. Scientists believe there might be hydrothermal vents on Europa, similar to what we have in the deepest parts of our oceans here on Earth. And these vents, they release heat and chemicals from the moon's interior, which could provide the energy needed for life.
So even without sunlight, there could be entire ecosystems thriving down there. That's wild. What about Titan, then? Why is that moon so interesting?
Titan's fascinating because it's kind of like a time machine showing us what early Earth might have been like. It's much colder, obviously, but its atmosphere is packed with organic molecules. And those methane lakes, they're definitely different, but they could hold clues about the basic building blocks of life.
It really makes you realize that life could be out there in forms we haven't even imagined. But, it's not just about finding life elsewhere, is it? All these discoveries made through space exploration, they really do have an impact on how we understand our own planet too, right?
Oh, without a doubt. A perfect example of that is Earth observation satellites. They're like having these high-tech eyes in the sky, constantly watching, monitoring our planet.
It's like a global checkup from orbit. So what kind of things are we learning from those Earth observation satellites?
Oh, it's way more than a checkup. They're constantly sending back data, and it's changing how we understand our own planet. We're talking tracking weather patterns in real time, predicting natural disasters, getting a handle on the effects of climate change. And this is all on a global scale.
Wow. So a lot of what we see about climate change in the news, like those images of glaciers shrinking or deforestation, rising sea levels, that's coming from these satellites.
A lot of it, yeah. And it's not just about pretty pictures, it's about having solid data. Data
Oh.
that we can use to make decisions, inform policy, track how the environment's changing, even manage resources better. It's amazing what we can do with it.
It's incredible how this technology that lets us study distant planets is also helping us protect our own. But okay, let's shift gears a bit. Look toward the future of space exploration. What's coming up next? What are we looking at?
Well, there are some really ambitious plans in the works. For one, there's the Artemis program. And that's not just about getting back to the moon, it's about setting up a permanent base there.
A permanent base. Now that's really intriguing. What would it actually take to pull that off? I mean, to live and work on the moon.
Oh, it's a huge challenge for sure. Everything from life support to radiation shielding. We're talking building habitats, figuring out how to create energy, maybe even grow food up there.
It sounds like something straight out of science fiction.
It does, doesn't it? It's a huge undertaking, but also a really exciting engineering challenge.
Definitely. So what about even further out, like interstellar travel? Is that something we could actually see in our lifetime?
Well, there are some pretty mind-blowing projects out there, like Breakthrough Starshot. The idea is to use these super powerful lasers to propel tiny spacecraft to, get this, a fraction of the speed of light.
Wait, really? Lasers? That sounds like Star Trek stuff. What are the biggest challenges to actually making something like that happen?
I mean, we're talking about developing insanely powerful lasers for one, and then you have to design probes that can withstand those forces and figure out how to get data back from, light years away. These are huge challenges, but even trying to solve them, it often leads to breakthroughs in other areas too.
That's what's so cool about space exploration. It pushes the limits of what's possible, not just in space, but in technology, science, even in how we see ourselves.
I agree. And now you've got private companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin jumping in, and it's really shaking things up. Their whole thing with reusable rockets, it's making space more affordable, more accessible.
Right. It's not just about countries competing anymore. It's becoming more collaborative. So with all these incredible advancements, where does that leave us regular folks down here on Earth? Why does all this matter?
That's the big question, right? It's easy to think space exploration is all kind of far off and not really relevant to our everyday lives, but it's more connected than you might think. Space exploration, it drives innovation. It leads to technologies that benefit us in so many ways. It inspires us to think bigger, to dream bigger. It reminds us that we're part of something much, much larger than ourselves, this amazing, mysterious universe. It's pretty awe-inspiring when you really think about it.
It's about pushing the boundaries of what humans are capable of, right?
Yeah.
That same drive that's led us to explore every corner of our own planet, discover new cultures, constantly search for knowledge. It's all connected.
Exactly. And who knows what we'll find as we keep exploring. New life, new resources, maybe even entirely new understandings of the universe and our place in it.
Now, that's an exciting thought. It feels like we're on the edge of a whole new era of discovery.
We are. And as we keep going on this journey, it's important to remember that space exploration, at its heart, it's a human endeavor. It's about our curiosity, our drive to explore the unknown, our desire to understand the universe and our place in it.
Perfectly said. Well, I think that about wraps up our deep dive into space exploration for today. It's been amazing taking this journey through the history, the discoveries, and all the incredible possibilities that are out there.
It really has.
Yeah.
But this is just the beginning. There's so much more out there waiting to be discovered.
Absolutely. To everyone listening, thank you so much for joining us on this cosmic adventure. Keep looking up at those stars and never stop asking questions about this incredible universe we call home.
All right, history buffs, buckle up, because today we're diving deep
Eat.
into the French Revolution.
That's right. And trust me, we're going way beyond the typical textbook stuff.
I think everyone's heard the basics, storming the Bastille, Marie Antoinette, let them eat cake.
Right, but there's so much more to uncover.
Like what?
Well, for starters, that whole France was broke thing. Yeah, it's true. They weren't exactly rolling in dough.
They did have some lavish parties at Versailles.
True, but honestly, their debt wasn't that unusual compared to other European powers at the time.
So if it wasn't just about money, what else was going on?
Okay, imagine this. A tax system so messy, so illogical, it would make your head spin.
Ooh, taxes. The gift that keeps on giving.
Right. But seriously, in pre-revolutionary France, it was a nightmare.
Like how so?
Different regions were paying different amounts. There were exemptions for the nobility and clergy.
So basically, the people with the most money were paying the least.
You got it. And collecting those taxes was like herding cats, no centralized system, just chaos.
I can see why people were getting restless.
Restless is an understatement.
Yeah.
And then you've got King Louis XVI trying to hold it all together.
What was he like as a ruler?
You know, he wasn't a total tyrant. He actually considered some reforms.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but he was constantly pressured by conservative nobles who weren't too keen on change.
It's like the original political tug of war. The poor guy never stood a chance.
Pretty much. But it wasn't just internal pressures brewing. There were also these radical new ideas floating around.
You mean like the Enlightenment?
Exactly. Think liberty, reason, individual rights. All these revolutionary concepts were spreading like wildfire.
And then there was that whole American Revolution thing, right?
Oh, yeah, that definitely didn't help. Here you have these colonists throwing off British rule, declaring independence.
Talk about a power move. It must have been incredibly inspiring to people in France who were already yearning for change.
Absolutely. It was like watching a neighbor win the lottery. Suddenly, anything seemed possible.
Okay, so you've got all this tension, this simmering discontent, but there had to be a spark, right? Something that ignited the whole powder keg.
There was. And that spark, my friend, came in the form of a not-so-subtle attempt at appeasement. The Estates General.
Now, the Estates General, wasn't that supposed to be like their version of Parliament or Congress?
Sort of, except it was rigged from the start.
Rigged. How so?
Well, picture this. France divided into 3 estates.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
The first estate, the clergy, the second estate, the nobility, and then the third estate.
The third estate being?
Everyone else. Merchants, artisans, peasants, you name it, all lumped into one giant group.
That doesn't seem very fair.
It wasn't. Because here's the kicker. Each estate got a single vote.
Wait, so the clergy and nobility, who made up, like, what, 2% of the population, they had the same voting power as the other 98%.
You're catching on. It meant the third estate. Even though they represented the vast majority of the French people, their voices were constantly drowned out.
I can see where this is going, and it's not pretty.
And to make matters worse, before this grand assembly, they did something quite interesting. They asked each region to compile lists of grievances. Yeah, basically a list of complaints, everything they thought was wrong with the system. These were called cahiers de doléances.
Cahiers de doléances.
Yeah, catchy, right. But seriously, it was actually a pretty revolutionary act for the time.
How so?
Well, it gave ordinary people a voice, a platform to air their grievances. Thousands of these cahiers poured in from all corners of France.
Talk about an inbox overload. So what kind of things were people complaining about?
Oh, you know, just the usual unfair taxes, lack of representation, government corruption, that sort of thing.
Sounds familiar. So this Estates General finally meets, tension thicker than a baguette dipped in gravy. What happens next?
Well, the third estate, they'd had enough. They decided, you know what, we're done playing by these old rules. And in a bold move, they declared themselves the National Assembly, claiming to represent the true France.
Whoa, mic drop moment. Talk about shaking things up.
Right. They were basically saying, we are France, and we're taking back our power.
That must have ruffled some feathers.
You could say that again. The other estates and the king were not happy.
So what did they do?
Well, when the National Assembly showed up for their next meeting, guess what? They found themselves locked out of their meeting hall.
Seriously?
Seriously.
Yeah.
But they weren't about to give up that easily. So they did something that would become a defining moment in the French Revolution.
What's that?
They marched over to a nearby tennis court.
A tennis court? You can't make this stuff up.
I know, right? It's almost comical, but in that moment, surrounded by nothing but empty courts and high hopes, they swore an oath that would reverberate through history, the tennis court oath.
Okay, tell me more about this tennis court oath.
They vowed not to disband until they had drafted a new constitution for France.
They were literally risking their necks for a chance at a fairer system.
And it wasn't just some empty promise. This was a line in the sand. They were fully committed to the cause, no matter the cost.
I can only imagine the energy in that room.
It was electric. And that energy, that spirit of defiance, it spread like wildfire through the streets of Paris and beyond.
So this is where we get to the part everyone remembers, right? The storming of the Bastille.
Exactly. July 14th, 1789, a date etched in history.
The day those Parisian crowds stormed the Bastille, freeing prisoners and striking a blow against tyranny.
It's the iconic image of the French Revolution. But here's a little-known fact. There were only 7 prisoners inside the Bastille at the time.
Wait, seriously, 7? All that for 7 prisoners?
It might sound anticlimactic, but it's a perfect example of symbolism over substance.
What do you mean?
The Bastille, it wasn't just any prison. It was this imposing fortress, a symbol of royal power, oppression, everything the French people wanted to overthrow.
So it was less about who was locked inside and more about what the Bastille represented.
Precisely. Tearing down those walls, it wasn't about bricks and mortar. It was a visceral demonstration of the people's power, a symbolic act of defiance that reverberated throughout France and across Europe.
The ultimate, we've had enough.
Exactly.
I'm starting to think the French Revolution was the ultimate hold my beer and watch this moment in history.
You might be onto something.
Talk about a statement. But tearing down a building is one thing, right? Like, how do you go from that to actually,
Governing a country.
Yeah. Like, what happened after the dust settled? Did things calm down?
Oh, not even close. In fact, you could say the storming of the Bastille was just the opening act.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, the revolution was just getting started.
So it was a bumpy ride.
Bumpy. We're like a roller coaster plummeting off the rails. It was a wild time, full of both progress and,
Progress in what?
Well, revolutions, they're like unleashing this torrent of energy, Exhilarating, but also pretty terrifying.
Okay, so paint a picture for us. What were some of those challenges, those bumps in the road, so to speak?
Well, right after the Bastille, this wave of paranoia started sweeping through the countryside.
Paranoia?
Yeah, they called it the Great Fear.
The Great Fear? That sounds ominous.
It was. Imagine. Rumors flying left and right, suspicions about anyone who seemed even remotely connected to the old order.
So people were on edge.
Totally. And that fear, it led to violence, a lot of it.
It's amazing how quickly things can spiral out of control, right? Like one minute you're celebrating, the next minute.
It's chaos.
Exactly.
And that brings us to, well, a darker chapter of the revolution.
You mean the Reign of Terror?
Yeah, the Reign of Terror. Now, we could do a whole deep dive on this period alone.
It's pretty intense.
To say the least. Yeah. Basically, from 1793 to 1794, France was gripped by this wave of, violence and political executions.
Right. It's hard to ignore that part of the story, even though it's pretty dark.
For sure. But it's important to understand why, right? Like, what led to such a brutal period?
Yeah.
Because it's not like it came out of nowhere.
But what did happen?
Well, France was facing all these threats, both internal and external enemies, counter-revolutionaries trying to undermine the whole thing.
So there was this sense of, paranoia? Urgency, like they had to defend the revolution at all costs.
Exactly. And into this climate steps Maximilien Robespierre.
Robespierre. This is the virtue through terror guy, right?
That's the one. He and his allies, they argued that extreme measures were necessary to, preserve the revolution, to protect it from its enemies.
Enemies being, anyone who disagreed with them, right?
Pretty much. They formed the Committee of Public Safety.
Which, despite the name, wasn't exactly known for its safety record.
Not quite. They basically created this system of revolutionary tribunals, courts designed to root out anyone suspected of being an enemy of the revolution.
Suspected being the key word there.
Right. It didn't take much to end up on the wrong side of the committee.
So how did the Reign of Terror finally end?
Well, like most things fueled by fear and paranoia, it eventually imploded.
What do you mean?
Robespierre himself became a victim of the terror. He was arrested, and, you can guess the rest.
Not exactly the peaceful ending one might hope for in a revolution about liberty and equality, huh?
Yeah, it's a pretty stark reminder that power, even in the hands of those claiming to fight for the people, can be a dangerous thing.
Absolutely. So after all the chaos, the bloodshed, how did France even begin to pick up the pieces? Like, where do you even start after something like that?
Well, even amidst all that turmoil, the revolution, it did achieve some incredible things. Remember that whole chaotic tax system we talked about?
Yeah, the one designed to make sure only the poorest paid taxes.
That's the one. Gone. They completely overhauled the tax system, made it more equitable, at least in theory.
No more exemptions for the nobility.
Nope. And it gets better. Remember how Louis the XVI was always hesitant about reforms because of those conservative nobles?
Oh, yeah, he was constantly caught between a rock and a hard place.
Well, with the monarchy gone, they were able to sweep away all those remnants of feudalism.
Feudalism, that's the whole system of lords and serfs and whatnot, right? Centuries-old traditions.
Exactly. And the revolution basically said, nope, we're hitting the reset button. No more feudal dues. No more special privileges for the nobility.
Talk about a complete 180. So everyone's equal now, at least on paper.
Well, in theory.
Yeah.
Of course, putting those ideals into practice is a whole other story. And it wasn't just the nobility feeling the heat. The revolution also had a profound impact on the Catholic Church.
Oh, yeah. The church had a lot of power and wealth back then.
A ton. They owned vast amounts of land, they were exempt from most taxes, and they had a huge influence on daily life. The revolution aimed to change all that.
So what did they do? Just shut down all the churches?
Not quite. They nationalized church property.
Nationalized, meaning they took it over.
Basically, yeah. They seized their land, their assets, you name it. And to really shake things up, they introduced something called the Civil Constitution of the Clergy.
The Civil Constitution of the Clergy? Sounds intense.
It was. Essentially, they were trying to make the church more, well, subservient to the state. Priests now had to be elected by the people, paid by the government.
Wow, talk about a power shift.
And to make sure everyone was on board, they made priests swear an oath of loyalty to the new government.
I bet that went over well.
Not so much.
Yeah.
It caused a huge rift within the French clergy. Some were open to the changes, but many others saw it as a direct attack on their faith.
They were being forced to choose between their religion and the revolution.
Exactly. It was a really difficult situation.
Yeah.
And it highlights just how complex and messy revolutions can be, you know?
Yeah.
There are always unintended consequences.
For sure. And speaking of complex and messy, there's one figure who emerges from all this chaos who deserves his own, well, deep dive.
Oh, yeah. I think we know what you're talking about.
A certain ambitious young general by the name of Napoleon Bonaparte.
Napoleon, the man who would become emperor, conqueror, legend. His story is a whole other chapter in the revolutionary saga.
Okay, so Napoleon, definitely a story for another deep dive. But before we get completely sidetracked by his rise to power, we've got chaos, we've got reform, we've got a whole lot of change swirling around. What about the legacy of the French Revolution? Like, this wasn't just a French affair, was it?
Oh, not at all. Not even close. The French Revolution, it was like this shockwave that reverberated across the globe. I mean, think about it. For centuries in Europe, absolute monarchy. It was just the norm, you know, kings and queens calling all the shots.
Right, like it was just how things were done.
Exactly. And then suddenly you've got this group of revolutionaries in France saying, nope, we're done with that. Yeah. And they actually pull it off.
Yeah, they overthrew the king, they established the republic, they completely upended the established order. Talk about a wake-up call for the rest of Europe.
You better believe it. Monarchs across the continent, they were watching very, very nervously, and rightfully so. I mean, if it could happen in France, it could happen anywhere.
Right. And it wasn't just monarchs who were paying attention, right? Like all those ideas, the revolution unleashed liberty, equality, popular sovereignty. Those ideas didn't exactly stay within France's borders, did they?
Not a chance. They spread like wildfire. It's like the French Revolution planted these seeds of democracy, and they took root in all sorts of unexpected places.
So it was like this ripple effect kind of changing the political landscape.
Exactly. And it wasn't just contained to Europe either. Remember how we talked about the American Revolution being this inspiration for the French Revolution?
Yeah, like a sort of revolutionary chain reaction.
Well, the French Revolution, it went on to inspire other revolutions around the world too. For example, the Haitian Revolution.
Oh, right. The Haitian Revolution. That was huge. The only successful slave revolt in history.
Exactly. Led by Toussaint Louverture, they fought for their freedom, inspired by those same ideals that were driving the revolution in France.
Wow, I'd never really connected those two events before, but it makes perfect sense when you think about it.
Right. It just shows how interconnected history really is. These events, even when they're separated by time and distance, they can have this ripple effect that just keeps going for generations.
It's true. So we've got the French Revolution inspiring revolutions in other parts of the world, but then there's also this ironic twist, right? Because then Napoleon comes along and he ends up conquering a huge chunk of Europe.
It's true. Talk about a plot twist. Napoleon, a product of the French Revolution, ends up kind of embodying both its ideals and its contradictions. Right. Well, on the one hand, he spreads some of those revolutionary ideas, you know, illegal equality, religious tolerance throughout Europe.
So he's spreading revolution, but through conquest.
Yeah, it's pretty ironic, but at the same time, he also becomes this new kind of emperor this military dictator waging war and, crushing any dissent.
So it's a complicated legacy, to say the least.
It really is.
So where does that leave us centuries later? What's the lasting impact of the French Revolution? Why should we in the 21st century care about this tumultuous period in French history?
It's a great question. I think for me, the French Revolution, it serves as this really powerful reminder that the pursuit of liberty and equality, it's an ongoing struggle. It's not a destination you arrive at. It's a journey.
It's not like you just flip a switch and boom, instant perfect society.
Yeah, if only it were that easy. The French Revolution, with all its triumphs and its tragedies, it reminds us that change is messy progress, isn't always linear. And sometimes things have to get a lot worse before they can get better.
And that the fight for a better world never really ends. It's something future generations have to take up themselves.
Exactly. We can't just rest on the laurels of past revolutions. Those rights and freedoms we often take for granted, those were hard won, and they require constant vigilance and engagement to protect.
It's so easy to just assume those rights will always be there. But history shows us that's not the case.
Not at all. We can't take anything for granted. We have to be active participants in our democracies, hold our leaders accountable, and never be afraid to speak out against injustice wherever we see it.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the French Revolution, I think the biggest takeaway for me is that it's not just some dusty old chapter in a history book. It's a story that's still being written today.
Absolutely.
It's a story about the power of ideas, the struggle for a better world, and the enduring human spirit that keeps striving for progress, even in the face of incredible challenges. So we hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, and we encourage you to keep exploring, keep asking those tough questions, and keep learning. Because history, it's not just about the past. It's about understanding who we are and what's possible. And the French Revolution, that's a story that has a lot to teach us about all of that.
I couldn't agree more.
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder the ongoing revolution of ideas. Until next time, keep those brain cells buzzing.